The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Andrea Sparks. Welcome to our monthly webinar series. Today we have two special guests, Dr. Shannon Deere and Cheryl Miller, who have just written a book, hot off the press, about businesses engaging with survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking and other crimes. And we are so excited. This is very, very timely for us, as we are really beefing up our efforts to provide economic empowerment to survivors and help our grantees do so as well. I understand that we have people from Texas Workforce Commission on the call and lots of other stakeholders who are interested in this and working on these kinds of issues right now. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to remind you, we will have Q&A. You can ask questions in the chat. And at the end, we'll reserve about 10 minutes for questions and answers. And we also will have a webinar next month, the second Thursday of the month at 1 o'clock. Usually that's when we do it, on our legislative updates for this past session in the Texas legislature, which was really a banner year for human trafficking legislation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl and Shannon. We are so excited that y'all are here.
We're excited to be here. I'm Shannon. I'm Shannon Deere, and I am a professor in Texas A&M's Business School, and do research on the intersection of business and social responsibility. And then Cheryl, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Cheryl Miller, and I own a small business doing consulting and training. And prior to that, I ran a housing program for 18 years for women in any kind of crisis situation, and the women in that program ran a social enterprise. So that's me.
Great. And we partnered up on our book, which releases August 15th, called Business Doing Good, Engaging Women and Elevating Communities. And like Andrea said, it is about 6 principles for businesses that can also be used by nonprofit organizations, but for businesses to employ women who have overcome challenging paths of incarceration, poverty, addiction, and sex trafficking. And so before we partnered up on the book, Cheryl and I worked together on some of the research that I did on women who are exiting sex trafficking situations. So I used her organization as well as several others across Texas to interview women who had exited 3 to 20 years prior to the interview. They had all been survivors of various forms of sex trafficking and had been supported by organizations in Texas. 60% of the participants in my study exited through the model that is now in the book and that we're going to talk briefly about today, because we only have an hour with you, but we are excited to continue the conversation with any organizations that are interested. We've been extremely inspired because economic sustainability seems to be a key theme for combating sex trafficking, both as we've seen for the state of Texas, for many nonprofit organizations that we're partnering with now, and for companies across the country, which we'll talk to you about in a little bit. But as most of you probably know, economic sustainability is incredibly important to survivors of sex trafficking. We, I think, as a state have done a good job. Of course, there's room for improvement on the services side, but now it's really time to look at the economic sustainability side, because the research found that women really needed the economic sustainability to reduce recidivism and to boost self-confidence and self-esteem. As you can see from this quote from Amelia, she said the money was far more of a relapse than the dope ever could be. She knew that she could make $50 in 5 minutes, and she had numbers memorized. And so that was a draw back into the sex trade for her. For Gloria, she talked about how similar story. She was living with the fact that she could make $1,000 in the sex trade and felt like everything would be fine, but she was making $8 an hour. And that was her whole paycheck, and it was really hard for her to make that transition. Cheryl's going to talk a little bit about some factors here as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw, particularly working with the women that I worked with, there were so many factors that were involved. There were issues that they came to the table with. There were organizations that we were working with. There were so many different components. There were nonprofits. There were businesses, and there was all these barriers. And it was difficult trying to figure out, how do we connect all the dots to make the systems that we have work effectively for the women that we're trying to serve or the clients that we're trying to serve. And so hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions about how to connect those dots as we go through this training. The business doing good model has 6 factors, and in the book, when the book comes out, each chapter begins with the story of a woman, tells the story of a woman, and highlights one of the 6 principles, and then also goes into why that principle works and how you can implement that principle either in your nonprofit organization, your government agency, or for businesses that are wanting to hire women in particular that are overcoming situations. And the 6 principles are experiential learning, immediate leadership opportunities, entrepreneurial culture, translation factor, restorative justice, and business partnerships. And of course, we'll go into a little bit into each of one of those today, but unfortunately not very much in depth because of time. One of the things that we get asked a lot is, when we talk about this, is how could I do this in my program? If you're a nonprofit, or if you're a government agency, there's several options. You can start a social enterprise. That's what we had here in our program. It was a social enterprise training center. They made money through training. It could be an innovation lab. In our community, our local college is trying to explore the idea of creating something like what we had before in connection with the college as an innovation creativity lab to launch businesses and gain trainings and stuff for sustainable earnings. And then finally, it could just simply be a training center. A lot of nonprofits, particularly that are serving clients, already have some kind of training program, some kind of job readiness. And so it would be very easy to take these 6 principles and infuse them into an existing model, because most of them are just principles. And so those are some possible structures for it. The strengths of this model is, I think the biggest strength is the emphasis on partnership. And we'll talk mostly about that in this webinar. But it also increases capacity for the clients that we're serving. It also builds on the strengths of the clients. It not only engages employers, but we're also educating employers. And if you use this model, it provides pre-employment transition opportunities where the women or the clients that you're serving actually have opportunities to practice these skills prior to entering into the workforce, so they're as prepared as they can possibly be. So the first principle that we want to talk about is business partnerships. When we started looking at this model and trying to figure out why it was working, we realized that there was 3 key pieces to this approach. There's 3 partnerships that needed to be in place. It was the nonprofit organizations. We were a nonprofit. We were a housing program. We were serving women, and so the women in themselves were actively engaged in all the decisions. They were very autonomous in making the decisions of what they wanted to do with their future, how they wanted to rebuild their lives, and so they had a lot of influence in what was going to happen. And we realized early on, as most people who are serving women or people in transition, that one of the big barriers is employment, and not just getting a job, but getting a job good enough to be able to pay bills and provide resources and benefits for the family. And so that third piece that was missing, we decided, let's reach out to the business community, let's start our own business. And when we did, we recognized that it was almost like the missing piece to the puzzle. And each of those points of that partnership brings something to the table. The women bring their resourcefulness, they bring their ideas, they bring their strengths, they become good employees, they make decisions about how things are run. In our model, the women in our housing program did all the on-the-job training for the other women as they entered the housing program, and they completely ran the social enterprise independently on their own. Businesses brought business expertise, both for the women who were trying to launch their own businesses through microloans and capital investments. We had like a Shark Tank called the Leadership Resource Team, but they also provided backup support for the social enterprise itself to make sure it was running effectively. And then the nonprofit provided the support for the women, but they also provided education to the businesses to understand the clients that they were hiring and why and what approaches worked best so that those women that would go into those jobs had the most chance of success. So there was a three-way partnership.
And the good news is that we have lots of companies that we've been working with who want to be part of that three-way partnership. And so we've been working with the Business Roundtable, which is an organization made up of CEOs from some of the leading companies in the country. And they have a new initiative called the Second Chance Business Coalition, which follows along with the Second Chance Act and Second Chance initiative that a lot of companies are taking on now to hire people who have been formerly incarcerated and to give them quality employment where a background check could be done, but would not be first in the part of the process and hopefully would not interfere from people securing high quality employment as well. And so these are some of the companies that have committed to the Second Chance Business Coalition and that we're working with or looking forward to working with to help partner nonprofit organizations or agencies helping support women overcoming sex trafficking with companies like these. And Cheryl's doing a great job of pushing them to think about all the different types of jobs that women overcomers could engage in within their company. And the other piece, when we think about that three-way partnership, is we're working to train the companies to be prepared for providing a high-quality work environment for women overcomers. Because we know, and Cheryl knows from a lot of her experience, that a lot of companies are not really prepared to provide a good workplace for women overcomers or to give them support and grace that they might need in the process of their transition. And so we're working to train those companies, and the book will also prepare companies to be ready for the types of employees that you all serve.
One of the things, before we go on to that, Shannon, one of the things that came up out of that Second Chance initiative is one of the processes for the book is getting endorsements, and we were contacted by Shannon reached out to Pepsi, an individual at Pepsi, and not only did she endorse the book, but after reading it, she reached out to us and said, I like these principles, and we would like to be able to implement a pilot project this summer prior to the book release, so we can show a success. And so she was the chief counsel over global human resources at PepsiCo. And so what needed to happen to be able to do that, and even though the Second Chance initiative targets people with felony convictions or formerly incarcerated, our book, the book that we wrote, talks about women from all types of various paths, and for at least for Pepsi, she's not limited to just hiring people that are formerly incarcerated. She wants to hire any women that are trying to make transitions, whether it's out of poverty or addiction or the sex trade. You know, the Second Chance initiative is not limited just to people who have been formerly incarcerated, at least not for some businesses like Pepsi. And so the first thing she asked us was, where would we find these women? So naturally, there needs to be this connection to people who are serving these employees. And I think it's important to say here, one of the things that is a real major point of the book is not so much the corporate social responsibility piece, while that is a great part of it, but this is a way for corporations to be socially responsible. But the bigger piece is what we're saying to these businesses: you're going to make a mistake if you're not hiring these women, because the women that we serve are industrious and they're resilient and they're tenacious and they're hardworking. and they have a unique skill set because of all the challenges that they've overcome, that they become very valuable employees. And so that is a bigger message in our book, is it's the right thing to do, but you're going to benefit from it more than you realize you are as a business. So the one thing about this particular model is, if you're working with a nonprofit, the nonprofit's preparing the clients for employment, and they're sending them, if we can make these connections between these corporations, through the Second Chance Initiative or any other business that, picks up the book and reads it and says, hey, I want to do this, you're creating a pipeline to employment, and those can be identified. And the exciting part about this particular model is it's not limited to any particular industry. If somebody wants to go into a distribution industry, they could do that. If somebody wants to go into the banking industry, they could do that. If somebody wants to go into retail, any of those things would fit, because the model is not industry specific.
And I'll just add to that, we are really excited about this, and the nonprofit organizations that we've talked to are really excited about this, because it seems like everybody's thinking along the same lines. For the first time, really, that we're seeing companies really excited about hiring women who have overcome challenging pasts, in part because, like Cheryl said, it is the right thing to do, but also because they have a human capital shortage. And so this pipeline aspect of the model is really important, and a great way in thinking about that 3-point partnership, that you all serving women overcomers, or anyone who's overcome a challenging past, can really be a valuable partner to businesses, is by helping to vet women who have come through your organization. To be able to say, this woman is employment ready, is so important for these organizations that really need to hire people. So we have a really great opportunity here.
And it also for the businesses, a lot of nonprofits provide wraparound services, so it's really beneficial. So while they're entering the workforce, a lot of nonprofits are still providing backup services for these clients, which is really a huge asset for businesses, and it's a good reason for them to want to partner with nonprofits for hiring. And when I mentioned about the premise of the book being that the businesses are the one that's going to gain because they're getting valuable employees, we actually had a conversation with an executive at JP Chase. They're one of the CEO for JP Chase is the chair of the Second Chance Initiative at the Business Roundtable. And they actually piloted a program last year in Chicago where they partnered with several nonprofits in the Chicago area and hired quite a large number of individuals who had been formerly incarcerated. And the results were exactly what we knew they would be. They had very little turnover employees. They turned out to be really good employees. And so other parts of the corporation was saying, hey, how do we get some of those employees into our area? And so it's not just the idea that it works, that we saw it work here. It's that it's been replicated and being done in other areas as well. So we're going to go now a little bit into each of the other 5 characteristics. When Shannon did her research and we started talking, it was like, why is this model working so well? What are the pieces that make it work? I mean, we were just doing it and we weren't sure exactly what was making it work. So we had to take some time to sit down, and the women helped with this as well. I mean, we all sat down and processed, why are y'all being successful? Why is this working so well? And that's where we identified these 6 principles. The first one is restorative justice. I have a background in mediation. I do mediation between victims of violent crime and their offenders in prison. I've done that for about 20 years. And the restorative justice field is highly transformative. It started in situation of crime, which is what the kind of mediations that I do, but then it has transitioned to where restorative justice practices have been implemented into other areas, which is what we did at our organization. We considered ourselves a restorative justice organization. And whenever restorative justice is in place, it speeds things up. Things happen more rapidly. We saw that in the mediations, that the healing would come more significantly when they participated. The research shows that victims heal more rapidly when they participate in these types of models. And so we implemented it in the housing program. And sure enough, it's exactly what happened. Is the change that was happening with women started happening more rapidly and also more dramatically. So there's a quote from one of the women yeah, there you go. Shannon, I don't know who that was. Do you remember?
Sure. So yes, this one was one of our participants named Clara, and she talked about how you start to build self-worth and self-esteem when you have a job, and how important that was for women who are overcoming challenging pasts. Really, in talking about the services that they received that were most important, many of them were important, and especially in their first year after transition. But ultimately, what became most important to them was being able to get a job, because it wasn't just the income piece of it. It wasn't just that they had pay. It was that they were beginning to see themselves as productive members of society who were valued by an employer, providing value to society. And that was what was the most transformative in integrating them back into society. And so the restorative justice, go ahead.
I was going to say, and there was also the restorative justice piece of it. In fact, it goes, if you go on to the next slide, one of the two of the elements, there's actually 5 elements in restorative justice, but the 2 critical ones that we saw a lot in our program was the direct voice, where the women were actually speaking into what they wanted, the future they wanted, the jobs they wanted, that type of thing. But there was also accountability for harms that they had done. And when they did that, and we had all kinds of ways for them to take responsibility for harms that they had done if they had been formerly incarcerated, that type of thing. And when they did that, we saw some really significant transformation happening. And that's part of the quote that you saw on the slide before, where she said, I was a productive member of society. Now she was doing things right as opposed to doing things wrong. But what's important in accountability is, we really would hold our women accountable for the harms they've done, and we would encourage them to do things to make it right. How can you make things right? What's important when you're working with the clients that y'all are working with, in particular, with the sex industry, or trying to exit that, is be really careful that the accountability is not for things that was done to them, but maybe things that they have done since then. For an example would be, if you're working with a client who has been a victim of a crime, you don't want them been a victim of trafficking, you don't want them taking responsibility for that. But there are behaviors that can come because of that. We would see a lot of aggression, a lot of manipulation, a lot of relapse, and that type of thing. Those are the behaviors that we would hold the women accountable for. If you're running a housing program and you have someone who's angry because of what's happened to them, it's understandable, but you're not going to let them keep beating people up in your housing program. You're going to want to hold them accountable for the harms that they've done so that they can move past that. The 2 things that we saw happen when women took responsibility, personal responsibility for the harms they did, 2 things happened. One of them, shame lost its power over them anymore because they didn't have to be ashamed of what they had done. And that was a huge issue. And the other one is they realized they had a choice. I can choose to be responsible for my actions, or I can choose not to be. And once they chose to be responsible, they realized, oh my gosh, what else can I choose to do? And it really opened up a future for them that they didn't realize that they would have had otherwise. So, like some of the greatest assets, when you incorporate restorative justice, you can use restorative justice model, the concepts in any program. You can use those principles. You'd have to read the book to see what they are, but you can infuse them into any program. Or you can actually use restorative justice processes like circles as a way to create opportunities for your clients. I'm doing a circle training for some of the groups coming up in this next month, for them to be able to use circles as a way to address problems that they're seeing with their clients. So the great assets of restorative justice is it creates an opportunity to be heard, it eliminates shame from past behaviors, it creates systems for building and rebuilding, and it recognizes the dignity that's inherent in all people.
So we're going to talk the next principle, which is experiential learning. And experiential learning was a hugely important part of the research that we found as being most impactful, again, for transformation, which you saw in restorative justice, but also for how can women learn the fastest to be not just job ready, but life skills ready as well. And experiential learning was a significant part of that. And we have a quote here, also from Clara, where she said that one of the things that the participants who exited through Cheryl's organization said was that Cheryl's phrase was, figure it out. And not in a mean way, but in a, you are smart and you are capable, and I want you to go figure out how to do this project. I want you to go figure out how to make that flyer for the business. I want you to go figure out how to do a training to help law enforcement understand survivors' experiences. And so Clara said, by not giving me the answer, but making me start to look and dig and realize I was capable of so much more, I became validated by, she became validated by her intellect and not just by her appearance. And the fact that she could think and learn on her own, she was able to apply that in many different settings besides just making the flyer or developing the training.
One of the things that makes experiential learning a little bit different, it's a non-traditional approach to instruction. Typically, most programs are, instructor-led. Somebody standing at the front of the room, giving information. People are processing it. I mean, there may be activities involved, but it usually has some type of instructor involved in a traditional type of learning environment. When you use experiential learning, it kind of flips that over, where the tasks are given, and then the participant themselves goes out and figures out how to do it. It's a really easy principle to implement into any existing training program. We were using volunteers to help our women get job readiness, but as the women started developing their own models, their own curriculums that fit better for them, we didn't need volunteers anymore. The women themselves were the ones that were actually training each other. And so it works independently, which when they first wrote the curriculum at our training center, it was like a 6 weeks course, but then we realized it didn't work that well because the clients that we were serving could tend to be transient or had things come up where they couldn't finish it. So they wrote them in independent modules that were not succession necessary, where they could work independently at their own pace and their own time, and it really created a lot of opportunities for them to learn new and exciting things.
One of the themes that runs through all of the principles is autonomy for survivors or for overcomers. And experiential learning really provides that, and it helps to quickly build especially self-confidence as a result of experiential learning, being able to figure things out on their own, not being told what to do or necessarily even how to do it, but to be able to have that autonomy to work on their own. It also creates a strong work ethic. It helps them to learn problem solving, which can be an extremely valuable life skill, as well as a work skill, flexibility, adaptability, and the ability to work under pressure. A lot of the women said at first they would panic a little bit when Cheryl would say, hey, go figure it out. But the minute they did, and no one let them flounder for too long, but the minute they did, they really felt that that impact of being able to do it on their own, figuring it out and having self-confidence to do it again and again, not just at work, but in their personal lives as well.
Yeah, I think there's a video that highlights that coming up.
Yep, I'm ready now.
The contract with the city. Our contract is worth $11,000, and everything about is giving back what we've been given, teaching in the community. I wrote the curriculum, and I wrote the curriculum. Can you read that? Anyway, I wrote the curriculum, and I'm very, very proud of myself. I never thought in a million years that I really think that I'm on the right track. We're just on a simply straight way out in the community and doing my lifestyle and understanding my lifestyle. But I wanted to make that bottom line. You don't have to live like that.
I hope y'all are able to see that video. We're going to talk now about entrepreneurial culture, which was an important part of the findings in helping women overcomers to learn to be valuable to a business, to learn to maybe start their own businesses as well, which we know is something that a lot of nonprofit organizations right now are interested in helping women do, is to find the resources and skills to start their own businesses. This is a quote where they talked about how the initial work that women received was oftentimes really terrible. Clara was a fry cook, and she talked about how it was always greasy and her face was breaking out and she hated it. And she would always think that there's got to be an easier way to make money. And the women had opportunities to do that by starting their own businesses, but also by the organization having an entrepreneurial culture within the organization, even for women who didn't want to start their own businesses. So one of the ways that the organization set that culture was by creating a culture for innovation and change, that women's voices would be heard if they recommended innovation and change within the organization. And so we encourage companies to implement all of these principles too, like experiential learning, restorative justice, for them to provide their employees with those opportunities. And so within a corporation, to have entrepreneurial culture is extremely important, because we know that survivors like those that you all serve have some unique skills that they bring to the company, and that they can really work to change that company, to bring innovation to the company and new ideas. An entrepreneurial culture also accepts and learns from failure. So it's a culture where women can try new things, and if it doesn't work, they're not punished for that. Within an entrepreneurial culture, there is a lot of opportunities for women to thrive once they have the right support, once they embrace a willingness to fail, once they embrace a tolerance for uncertainty, if the organization can eliminate the red tape, give women ownership and autonomy of any projects that they implement, and have a well-defined reward system for any new ideas that any overcomers bring to the organization. My favorite principle in the book is translation factor, and we've alluded to this quite a bit within the presentation so far even. But translation factor is really an asset-based focus for embracing women who have overcome challenging pasts. And we know a lot of organizations have a deficit-based focus, but we're really encouraging organizations to look at an asset-based model for engaging with their clients. And that could be a trauma-informed model, certainly. And it's also looking at all of the skills that women have and the ways that they can make decisions for themselves and for an organization. So Ava's quote here said, she, being Cheryl, always tells us, used to hustle for money and for bad back in the day, but now you can use that hustle for good. And we saw so many women turn their ability to hustle into an ability to sell, an ability to use their work ethic for good within an organization. Helena said, you can take those attributes that you have that so many of their family members thought were negative, like manipulation, and turn that into motivation, which is really important for organizations, for leaders within organizations to have the ability to motivate their employees. Translation factor is really translating behaviors or even attributes and skills that have been perceived as negative into positive attributes and skills that can be used within a company. This was what built the women's self-efficacy the most, or their belief in themselves the most, was having someone say, you're really good at this, and that's not a bad thing. Here's how you can use that in business to help yourself and to help an organization. Lisa has many stories about organizations that, or about women who would, hustle and go ride their bikes miles to steal a pair of jeans and sell them. And Cheryl was able to say that motivation and work ethic and what you're doing, you don't have to do that for illegal behavior. You can put that towards something in a business. And so we really talk a lot to businesses about the skills and attributes that women overcomers have that they cannot find in someone else within their organization, that makes the women overcomers unique and valuable to their organization.
Yeah, and when Shannon was talking about asset-based, really building on the strengths, there are still going to be times when needs are going to need to be fulfilled. I mean, that's okay to have a needs-based approach sometime, but it's just not healthy if that's the only approach that you have. You really have to be able to look at what are the assets that these clients are bringing to the table.
Exactly, and all of that is really consistent with trauma-informed care as it was intended, where women have autonomy to make decisions about the services they receive, and where you're looking at what are their strengths and what are they doing well right now and how can we build on that. With translation factor, it creates a lot of opportunities for these words basically just mean belief in themselves, for someone else to believe in them. And for them to then believe in themselves creates a new sense of validation. Our next principle is immediate leadership opportunities. And many of you have implemented immediate leadership opportunities within your organization through things like survivor leadership. And so survivor leadership was a consistent theme across the interviews that I did. And here's an example where Ava said, I immediately jumped into this role. We knew that was going to happen. And you saw the video where the woman said, I created the curriculum. That this gives them an opportunity very quickly to take a leadership position. We don't mean within the housing program. If you run a housing program, we don't mean that, but within some facet of the organization. For Cheryl and her organization, that was within the social enterprise, that women were able to take leadership opportunities really quickly, even if it was, hey, we need you to create this flyer. We need you to track the clients that we have. We need you to do whatever it was that the organization needed. It can be very small, but it was immediate leadership that built that self-esteem and self-worth and confidence to then build on that and do something else like building curriculum.
Yeah, and they also did it in the area of restorative justice. They had all kinds of ways that they would give back, and they were the ones that organized all of that.
Perfect. And immediate leadership opportunities are important because it is survivor leadership. So giving women an opportunity very quickly to show that they have skills and attributes that can be valued. And it provided women with step-ahead mentorship. So step-ahead mentorship is really important because it's a way that survivors can see hope in the future by seeing someone who's a little bit ahead of them that has had success, and for them to be able to say, I can be like that person. I can do this. If I can go a little bit further, I can be like them. And that helps so much with reducing recidivism. And with survivor leaders, as most of you know who are already using survivor leaders, it increased relatability, which gave credibility. Without survivor leaders, there was always that risk of feeling like they don't know what I've been through. But with survivor leaders, they do. And that was really important for the women's process of integrating back into work and healing in the recovery process as well.
And keeping them accountable because they knew the games that they would play as well.
That's true. Here's a video of one of the participants as well, talking about a business that she started, which started through that immediate leadership opportunities as well. There's so much about that story that really illustrates the principles. You heard entrepreneurial culture, translation factor even, but that we love the part about how Stella helped Summer to develop her business plan. And Stella was just a few steps ahead on developing her own business plan, and really poured into Summer, gave her mentorship, and helped her to develop her own business plan. So it wasn't, oh, we have to tap into a volunteer in the community in order to be able to do this, or that Cheryl had to mentor everybody in their business. The survivors were doing that, which was beneficial to them and to those that they were mentoring.
You know, when you look at all of the principles like translation factor, the experiential learning, the immediate leadership, and the fact that they're
I think Cheryl had,
the fact that they're doing it in a context that's safe. You know, they're in their training program, they're in their social enterprise. It allows for those pre-employment opportunities to really practice those skills and the immediate leadership, the experiential learning. All of those things build capacity for the clients, where they recognize strengths and assets they didn't even know they had, or they did and they just weren't using them correctly. So using the model really creates a lot of opportunities to prepare the women, so when they do enter the workforce, they are most likely, they have the greatest possibilities of success. So that's why we think, you know, connecting the dots with the partnerships and using these different things really ends up kind of addressing all the obstacles and all the various different pieces, and everybody wins. The nonprofits win because they have healthy relationships with businesses. The businesses are getting excellent employees, and women are getting opportunities for a great future, both for them and their children.
Yeah, we really see with women both the generational impact that the model has had and can continue to have as it impacts both them and their children, and certainly as the work that they've done impacts other survivors. This was the first survivor who started a business through the kind of entrepreneurial piece of the social enterprise that Cheryl ran. And she then, as you heard in the video, helped Summer start her business. And this is Summer that you saw in the video, who started Luna Juice. But then they've all helped other people. And so the model is so exponential, because once another, that survivor helps more people. And then there's so many people that are impacted, again, from kind of a survivor generation, but also then generations down through their children as well.
Yeah, like Shannon said, Stella was the first business that launched with a loan for $2,400 to launch her salsa business. She was only 10 months sober when she got that loan. She's still in business today. Summer followed right after her, about 6 months after her, and launched her Luna Juice with a $5,000 loan, and then went on to expand with capital investments to buy a food truck. And when she sold her company in December this last year, it was grossing about $500,000 in sales. All that starting with a $5,000 micro loan. But then Summer turned around and opened a sober living house and created a social enterprise of unshakable milkshakes to support that. So there was all this exponential growth that was happening around these survivors. This slide right here is just a list of some of the results that we saw. It's not all of them, but just some of the results that we saw through this model that we used here locally in Victoria.
And it really is inspiring, you know, when we think about the success that Stella and Summer and many, many others have had as a result of the model, whether that's in their own business or working in an organization. It's not just in the, oh, you know, Summer had this much in sales, but it's in all that they've accomplished in their lives, and the happiness that they've achieved, and the balance that they've achieved, and the kind of disassociation with some of the chaos that comes with the lifestyle and the game that many of the women had been forced into through a trafficking situation. And so we are obviously have flown through all of this, but we do have the book as support. And we also have, we're going to answer questions for the next 15 or so minutes. So please send those questions over in the chat as well. We would love to answer your questions.
And one thing I want to add too that I don't know that we mentioned is not only did this model create these opportunities for this dramatic transformation, 8th grade dropout, now a college, now a school teacher, but what was even more significant is they were able to maintain it. The recidivism rate and the relapse rate dropped dramatically when we started doing these things because they had so much to live for. They recognized, okay, I have way too much to lose now. I am not going back to that other way of living. And so all of the women that were that participated in Shannon's research are all still very happy and productive and doing what they set out to do.
And like we said, we're available for additional resources for you all. We work with training companies. So if you have companies that are in your network that you feel like need to be trained to be prepared for hiring women who have left your organization or who are moving through your organization, we are available for them, and we're available to you as well for any training or consultation to help you to implement the model to support and elevate both your women and the community as well. So we'll open it up for any questions that you all have. We would love to be able to answer those.
Thank you so much, Shannon and Cheryl. It doesn't look like we have anything in the chat right now. Let's see.
Well, we can certainly talk a little bit more about things that we think might be of interest to any of the participants. I know one thing that is really important that I think a lot about is, and I know Cheryl has worked really hard on, is that a lot of organizations that we talk to feel like they have such limited resources, and how could they in the world could they accomplish this? But that's really where that survivor leadership piece can come in as well, is in helping them, is in engaging survivors in helping each other. And the social enterprise piece can be really beneficial for nonprofit organizations as a basically running a business that their survivors can run, and where it can work as a training ground for getting them ready for business. But it can also work as a tool for generating resources for clients as well. So it can be a really positive model for providing services and support and training for women who are exiting trafficking situations.
Yeah, we actually decreased our need for an employee because of it, because the women, we had a contract with the social enterprise as a training center. They did all our office skills, and so we didn't need a receptionist and an office manager anymore, because the women answered our phones, did all our filing, and they were paid for that through that contract. But it was less than what we were paying an employee, so it was because it was a training program.
Well, it looks like we still have folks on, and we certainly have time to answer questions if y'all want to put those in the chat. Otherwise, Cheryl and I are both available for conversations with you all at any time, and would love to provide additional support for you as well. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody thinks would be useful. We're happy to talk about that.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Do y'all mind sharing your contact information? You mentioned that people can contact y'all if they needed any assistance.
Sure. Let me put that up on the screen so that everybody can have that. So I am Shannon Deere. And then Cheryl Miller. Uh-oh, Cheryl, I'm gonna part of your email address.
Hey, I will say that this particular model has been replicated in other areas, and so we know that it can be, and so that's what we're excited about, really helping others to see how to implement these principles.
Absolutely. So hopefully you can take down that contact information. We would love to continue to engage with you. We have some assessments that both businesses can do to see if they are kind of ready to implement these principles within their organization and hire women overcomers. And we also have one for nonprofit organizations. So you can kind of assess if you're ready to implement some of these principles within your organization and support women in this way as well. And we are working to pair both businesses and nonprofits together to try to provide women with more employment opportunities. So if that's something that you're interested in as well, we would love to have you reach out to us so that we can continue to build that database and pipeline for the businesses that are looking to hire women overcomers. So it was an honor for us.
Yeah, it would be really exciting as businesses pick up this book and say we want to do this and reach out for us to be able to say, well, here are some nonprofits in your area that you can work with that are preparing women for you so that you can hire. That would be so exciting.
Okay, so we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, Shannon and Cheryl. I actually received an email that the question box function is not working, so that's probably why we haven't received anything. I'm not sure what's going on with that. So if anybody does have any questions, please email either Shannon or Cheryl at their emails that are showing up on the screen right now, or you can email myself. My name is Jordan. Majority of y'all have my email from the webinar invite. But okay, thank you so much. And once again, y'all will receive a short survey evaluation at the end of this. So please go ahead and fill that out and then look for our next monthly invite that'll be taking place on July 8th. And it'll be our legislative session update. So thank you everybody for joining us, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
We look forward to answering any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you.